Hello, Farming Secrets, and welcome to another Let's Talk Soil. I'm super excited with this series of content that we've been created. I hope you have been learning lots about soil just as much as I have. Today, we are joined by Gerard. How are you today?
Oh, great. It's a beautiful day today. The bees are buzzing and the grass is growing. Best season
Excellent.
we've had for a few years.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. And so you're on Eaglerise Farm. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and your farm and your journey.
I spent my early life as a stock agent and as a fish farmer. And then I had an epiphany and I left all that, and I've been teaching for the last 27 years. And I bought the farm, Eaglerise Farm, 20 years ago. When I bought it, it was a single paddock, didn't have a fence post on it. It's hard to appreciate how barren it was. It's fairly challenging sort of block. It's steep to sloping. There's no flat on it. In the last 20 years, I've developed it using permaculture principles, agroecology, and what's now called regenerative agriculture. It's all pretty much the same to me. I've done about 12 kilometres of fencing on it. We're off grid in a straw bale house. And we run Dexter cattle, Dorper sheep, bees, seasonal pigs. We've got some olives in. We're starting a vineyard. We've got vegetables. We've got a couple hundred fruit trees. And we're going to get into mushrooms as well. And we're going to develop a produce kitchen so we can value add our produce. We only sell at farmers markets. We sell direct. My theory is, if you want to make money farming, you've got to be a retail farmer, not a commodity farmer.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty passionate about the small scale production type stuff.
Yeah, awesome. And so, like, I think you're living the dream, and it's amazing. And I want to just remind everyone that how long has this taken you to get to this point here?
60 odd years.
Okay, awesome. So it's a long game.
But I've had the farm for 20 years.
Okay.
When I bought the farm, I was working part-time and I was a sole parent. And so I was going to develop farm as my superannuation. Now, I've gone through some life-changing things in these 20 years. And now we plan to, my vision for the farm is 5,000 years now, not short term. And we've got a process that we're putting into place to try and make sure that our farm continues. And that compels me to make appropriate decisions in my design and my management, because there's no short-term fix.
Absolutely. When you shared your 5,000 year vision with me a couple of weeks ago, I have shared it with a few other people saying, this is the type of farming we need. You know, it's not yield to yield farming. It's like, how do we build a space that gives a legacy that is to generations we will never meet? And I think that's just a great way and so inspiring.
All right, there's a really good Greek proverb that says a man is wise when he plants trees under which shade he'll never sit. I'm not saying I'm wise, but it's a really good point, you know. And if you're commodity farming, if you're just commercial and after money, well, then you make decisions based on what your accountant tells you, sort of thing. And it's all short term because you want to sell the farm and retire over the coast and go fishing. We want to provide the farm as an asset to people who can't afford the farm, and let them run the farm as if it's their own and pay us what I call a pension. It's not share farming. It's not leasing. It's just a pension. We're designing a system where we won't need a lot of income because we want to stay living on the farm as well. And so if you've got your food and your power and your accommodation and you're not using much fuel and someone's cutting the firewood for you, I'm not sure that I'm going to need much money really. And we'll have wine, and we'll have the wine as well. So
what a wonderful lifestyle. I love that.
Yeah.
Very inspirational. So I want to get a little bit more into your soil knowledge. What does soil mean to you? Because obviously you said you came onto the farm, it was pretty, a bit of a blank canvas. So what, over those years, what does soil now mean to you?
Yeah, I've got to be really careful when I talk like this, because if you see me looking out like this, I'm looking to see if there's any thunderclouds, because I feel I'm going to get struck by lightning with some things I say. Soil's critical, but, well, that's like saying I'm not a racist, but soil's critical, but you can only do so much. And as a small scale producer, and that's where my focus comes from, I don't have the time or the money or the resources to put into practice a lot of the traditional conventional recommendations from a soil test. So I don't do them. You know, I've got on 250 acres, on the half of it has probably got about 30 paddocks. So what paddock I'm going to do a soil test on? You know, and because we've got veggies and vineyard and olives and all that sort of stuff, where do you do a soil test and what do you do? We look at the farm as an ecosystem, and I look at myself as a predator, a top order predator within that ecosystem, but that gives me the responsibility of managing the ecosystem and interacting with the ecosystem. And an ecosystem can only produce a certain amount of productivity. And if you try to force an ecosystem to produce more than it's capable of, you're only going to achieve that by adding energy in the form of feed or fertilizer and things like that, which we can't do. Now I work full time still. And so there's only a certain amount of time. Working full time and going to the markets means no spare time. And so it sort of suits us that we have a fairly minimalist approach. And we look at our system and we try and grow what the system's capable of rather than forcing the system to grow something I want. So it's a needs and wants issue. So looking at the soil, our farm was grossly eroded decades ago in the rabbit plagues. One of the locals was telling me that when he was a kid, he was involved in one of those rabbit drives that they used to do. You know, the photos are horrendous, but he was there. And so the topsoil, the good soil from my place is on my neighbours. You know, it's gone. And it's taken 80 odd years to try and replenish the soil and let it grow again. This place would have been a merino farm in its day, which merino wethers would have flogged the ground pretty hard to get the fine wool. We're trying to manage it much more carefully. And so the plant selection that we've got, it's native pastures, and our cropping plants, we look at what our ecosystem's capable of. And so it's a dry Mediterranean type climate, and with climate change, it's just going to get harsher. And so we've looked at harsh Mediterranean type plants. So we're putting the grapevines, we've put in olive trees, our plans to put in some pistachios and some carobs as well. And the fruit trees that we've put in, we've spaced them out to produce a food grassy woodland rather than a food forest. And we've put them on swales as well. And just the other day, I walked across and after a few days after rain, and there was water in the swale. So those fruit trees are going to have had a good water this year. So we're designing for a drier climate, and we're selecting plants for a drier climate. Having said that, the soil is responded remarkably. Where my wife's growing veggies, like you wouldn't grow veggies on our farm. I'll tell you right now, it's just terrible. So my wife's decided she's going to be a market gardener, and we're trying to grow veggies. And the earlier plots she used, where she's put in a lot of organic matter, has responded incredibly. Wow. We do the Northern Rivers Soil Health Card, and part of that is looking at the biology in an area, and it's remarkable, the difference. Less compaction, more biology, obviously more organic matter, and the plants are responding. You can see in the garden, the market garden, you can see the bits, you can see the succession happening. It's really encouraging.
Love that. And I love the way that you've taken this real holistic, full circle approach to the soil meaning. It's not just about what's beneath your feet. It's looking at the whole system. And, you know, I think you've articulated it really well in that soil is soil, but it means all these other things. It's not just the soil itself, but it's the way that you know, the grasses and the native plants are grown on it, and the way that you're producing different products from it, and knowing your soil and where to grow the right things and where, and getting water and the filtration and moisture, and it's a whole system. And I love the way that you took us through that journey. I almost felt like I was taking a virtual farm tour of your farm as you were explaining that, and you made me quite hungry as well with all the food you've spoken about.
Yeah. And some of our grazing paddocks now, we've put swales in as well. Now, our swales are only, 12 inches deep, and we space them out about 20, 25 metres. We use a small 35 horsepower tractor. It's one of my things I say, anything more than 35 horsepower demonstrates the testosterone levels of the driver.
Right.
Australia was built with little grey Fergies, which are 25, 35 horsepower. So I thought that's all I'm going to need. And take me a little bit longer. It just about everything I want. Just took 3 passes to make these swales. And on the bottom edge of the swales, I've put in some eucalypts at about 25 metre spacings, and they will grow up to provide corridors for squirrel gliders. And then they'll also provide shade for the paddocks. But the swales are just holding the water back. So there's a 20 metre run in a rainfall event, and then it hits the swale, settles in the swale. And because the soil's, it's granitic, it's gneiss soil, there's a high infiltration rate really. And so the swales allows it to soak in and percolate down the drainage line a bit better. And I can already see, because I've done that in 3 paddocks, I can already see a difference. Because one paddock was a little bit better already, and you can see the difference that the pasture's growing crazy, and then it'll work. And what that's going to do is slowly increase the organic matter in the soil.
Yeah. And even just, growing the eucalypt trees and knowing the purpose for them, they're going to provide, habitat. And, that is a delayed gratification project. It's not a quick win. You can't get a yield in that in a month's, in a year's, in a 12-month period. But it's that long-term thinking that I think really changes when people have that long-term plan for their farm and vision. And, you do such a great job even on your website articulating and explaining the way that you're doing your farming and why you've set the farm up. And we've spent a lot of time looking at your website and sharing some of your articles, because I think you just do a great job at having everyone, I call it learning out loud. You're experimenting, you're trying different things, you're observing, and then you're documenting them on your website. And you have your whole farm mapped out on Google Maps with all the different zones. And I think as someone who's inspired by your farm, that just helps me get the vision that you're trying to achieve. So kudos for doing that and sharing these stories with us even here today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Those paddocks that I've put the swales in, I've basically committed to not grazing them for about 7 years to let those trees grow up, unless I get really excited and find some time to put tree grubs around them, which the cattle may knock over. So what I'm planning to do there is we've got a flail mower. It's not a slash, it's a flail mower that chops up, turns it into mulch. So I'd like to go through those paddocks and do that, and that will imitate a grazing. So I'll set it up high and just chop it off, and it'll cut the seed heads, especially some of the weedier species I've had, or less productive species. And it'd be like a grazing, chops it up, and the mulch will settle down on the soil, which will increase the organic matter in the soil. And so by not grazing a couple of years, it's going to do those paddocks a lot of good. It's going to be one of the best investments I've made, I'm sure.
Yeah, love that. And so you've spoken about...
And with that, because I've got the 35 horsepower tractor and they're small paddocks, to do those 3 paddocks is probably going to use 20 litres of fuel.
Yeah.
So we do a balance on our fuel use. I haven't tallied it up, but for a few years I've been recording not only how much I spend on fuel, but how many litres I buy. So I can add up the litres I've used and balance that with the 20,000 trees we've planted on the farm. So we're carbon positive, I reckon.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And so you've spent a lot of time with, on the farm and even in the education space teaching. I'm curious to know, like, are there ways that you can look at soil and tell whether it's healthy soil or not? Are there any signs that you look for?
Yeah. Again, I look at it as a soil ecosystem. And to identify how healthy an ecosystem is, you look at the top order predators. So one of my soil indicators is a wedge-tailed eagle. Oh, no, didn't get hit. The wedge-tailed eagle is a top order predator in our system. And so for that wedge-tailed eagle to be breeding, which they do here, means right down the system that there's got to be a food chain. And so there's got to be insects for little critters to eat, for bigger critters, and then gradually the wedge-tailed eagle. So that, in a really big picture, I look at the wedge-tailed eagle as an indicator. But to come down to earth, literally, if you look at the soil ecosystem, the top order predator is going to be the worms and the bugs. So if you open it up and you see a lot of biology, macrobiology, well, then the soil's got to be pretty healthy. And if there's diversity, then I'm happy that with the nutrient level as well. And then to look at the nutrient level, I just simply look at the clover grass proportions of what's growing. So the clover is giving me the nitrogen, and the grasses are providing the carbon and energy. So if you've got carbon and nitrogen at the appropriate rates, then it starts breaking down just like a compost pile. And so the biology within the soil is starting at that micro level, and the macro level for the worms and all the little bugs and that. I don't know their names. I like that permaculture principle where you design from patterns to detail. I look at the pattern of things,
Yeah.
and I've got the confidence to know that if the pattern's right and I understand the pattern and what's happening, then the detail will come.
100%.
So I don't need to know the names of all those little critters.
Yep.
Because the pattern's right.
Yep. And I think that's such a really good point. I do want to highlight that for everyone who's listening, is that we can always get overwhelmed with all the sophisticated names of all the bugs and the fungi and the creatures. And we can use that as a reason and go, oh, this is too much for me. I don't know how to pronounce this long word with all these X's and L's and Y's in it. And so we can use it as a barrier. But what you've just said then is just so true for me, because I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I know a lot of farmers and people out there who learn through doing. If the pattern's right, then it doesn't matter about the detail. The pattern is what kind of matters. And the fact that you're looking at the species of hierarchy, and if the top's there, then the rest is all there, that just makes so much sense. It's like you don't have to complicate it by all the technical processes and how-tos and names of everything, because then we get paralyzed and we go too hard. I'll keep doing what I used to do.
Yeah.
So I love that.
You just got to, I call it honesty in conversation. You've just got to be honest in what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, knowing all the bugs, that's brilliant. Like Elaine Ingham's microscope course, that'd be fascinating. She's one of my, I don't have many gurus, but she's right up there. Because in one of her talks, she talks about that there's not a nutrient deficiency, it's a nutrient availability issue, right? And that basically says if you start looking after your soil biology, then the biology is going to be able to break down the mineral components to release more nutrients. It may never be the most fertile soil in the world, but that's sort of how it works. So you need to look at what you're planting. So that honesty in conversation is important. So if you want to know the bugs, put your hand up. I want to know the bugs because they're interesting. A lot of my students, part of what we do is look at what you can record and things like that. And they just go crazy with a massive list. But my question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? What are you going to do with that data? If you're not going to use it, then do you need to collect it?
Yep. Or you're just making more work for yourself to
Yeah.
pretend to be busy. I'm
Yeah.
collecting all these 400 data points. It takes me a whole week.
I often say the students should be better off sitting down having a glass of wine
Ditto.
and enjoying your farm, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And just observing the farm and go, that's interesting. Birds came in through this way this season. Last season, they'll come in this way. What's changed? You know, I think, you know, being an observer of the land is much more skillful than the, you know, but, you know, you can't manage what you can't measure, but don't go overboard and become so busy doing all the measuring and then no action. And there's the other side of it, you know, we're an education company. Don't sit there and learn everything before you even practice. You know, learn, do more, fail, and share that learning with others, and then go back and learn and go, what did I do wrong? Ask other people who have been there, done that. That's a great way of like, I call it learning out loud. And I think you do that on your website as well. And even with the conversation here today. And so it's just a much better way of helping everyone achieve more, and including yourself, because you can sit there and know all the theory. And if you've never put a spade into the dirt, you've done nothing. You know, that theory is useless and empty and meaningless.
I consider that I'm lucky that I wasn't brought up on a farm.
Right.
I was brought up in Melbourne, and I made a life-changing decision when I was in grade 3, and I went to a farm for summer holiday. Never left home, and that's why I'm sitting here talking to you today. Because when I was in grade 3, I said yes, I'll go to a farm. You know, life-changing. But because I didn't have the privilege of growing up on a farm and seeing my dad work in a farm and learning it all for just by observation as I grew up. I can remember when I knew nothing. And so I know that I've progressed and I've learned stuff over the years, and I find that fascinating, and I appreciate the learning experience, and I really enjoy directing the students to along that same sort of path.
Yeah. Yeah. And so is there a certain order of discovery? Like, was it organic and then like permaculture? Was there a particular flow, or you just went?
Well, I went to ag college and learned all the rules about farming, and I ended up being a stock agent. And I worked at Newmarket Sale Yards. I was an auctioneer at Newmarket Sale Yards very briefly. You know, that was an interesting experience. There's lots of characters involved in stock agents. Then I was a trout farmer for 10 years, and that was pretty intense farming. And then I started teaching. And when I started teaching, my first student was blind with an acquired brain injury, and that created me made me think how I communicate with people.
Yeah, interesting.
I used to let him drive me around on the quad.
Wow.
I'd say slow up, yeah, a bit to the left, because he had an accident on a motorbike, so he really appreciated being able to ride the quad.
Yeah.
And
that's
so from
a great magical moment as well. Like, and in just having that realization to like question your teaching style, you know.
Yeah, and I've always been like that. That student, we were doing some fencing, and I've always said, I'm not paid to do the work. The students have to do the work. That's how they experience things. And so I said, you got to dig a post hole, and he had trouble with the crowbar because he didn't know which was flat and which was the pointy part of the crowbar, so he couldn't dig a hole with it properly. And so I said, righto, let's go back to the shed. And we got up the shed, and we made the world's first braille crowbar.
Wow.
Where he did it, I made him do it, put a double weld on the head of the crowbar where the flat part of the crowbar was. So when it was in the hole, he could feel the little blob of weld on the head, and he knew he was digging a hole.
Wow.
That's
so interesting. You know, something that's so like, it's ingenious. Like, it's just something that we all take for granted, and you just throw that, you know, you throw it and you just know how to use it. But then that one little change can make the world of difference. You know?
Yeah. It's not much fun digging a hole with the pointy part of the crowbar, is it?
No, not at
No.
all. Not at all. Yeah, awesome. And so like, I just want to just, talk about Eaglerise Farm a little bit. Like what is your, share with the community what your kind of 3,000 year journey looks like, and why you so public with your vision and your value on your website. What's the change you're making?
All right. When I bought the farm, I was working part-time, and I thought, work part-time, farm part-time, develop the farm, set it up so it'll be a nice hobby farm to sell to someone on the northern part of Albury. That was my plan. And then after a few years, my son and I and one of his mates, we planted a couple of thousand trees as a woodlot. And I remember saying to him, I said, when your kids are leaving uni, these trees will be ready they could cut them down and sell them as firewood, and they can be there. They can go off touring the world, right? My son was 15 when I said that, so I was planning for his kids when he was only 15. So I've always been able to have this vision, so I've been lucky with that. And so that put the vision out to 40 odd years. And I lost my son, and we put his ashes up on the hill, and I was up there having a beer with him one night. And I said to my wife, in 200 years time, someone's going to be standing here and they're going to be explaining to someone why this cairn's here. And so that put the vision out to 200 years. I thought, gee, okay, so we need a design. And then I watched Brian Cox on doing a documentary, Professor Brian Cox, and he was standing in an olive grove in Greece. And he was saying that these olive trees are 5,000 years old. And immediately I thought to myself, we've got olive trees. They're going to be 5,000 years old one day. And I could just see it. I could imagine that going through. And so we just need to look after them better. And now we're designing more long life trees. We're actually putting in some oak trees and some chestnuts and things like that. They're not going to be highly productive, but they're going to be long-term trees, and they're going to provide certain ecological benefits to the farm over the next couple of thousand years. And I'll come back and haunt anyone that's here.
Your legacy will live on. I love that. Amazing thought process. And so we've been talking about your website a lot. How do people find the website? What's the web address for them?
It's eaglerisefarm.com.au.
Awesome. Nice and easy to remember.
Yeah.
And I really, really recommend everyone go and check it out and see it as a way of setting up your website if you're a farm or you have some land. You don't have to get to that point straight away, but just see some of the examples that are there, just of like some of the things you can talk about. You've got YouTube videos, it's very interactive. You've got a map that shows your land with all the different zoning. I think it's, quite clever, and it really makes me feel part of your farm journey just being on the website. And every time we've chatted, it's been really good.
I've been teaching for 27 years now, and I teach a diploma of organic farming, which is basically agroecology, and I also teach permaculture, and I teach more the small scale regenerative agriculture. The large scale is different because of the commodity aspect. And what I've done over that time, I ring my students one-on-one every week, and I've had so many marvelous conversations with the students that I'm compelled to try and document those conversations, and that's what I'm using the website for. I'm trying to write down what I've been saying to my students about my place, and bring in some of their stuff as well. It's a bit of a work in progress.
Love that. Maybe we should start a podcast together.
Yeah.
Capture these as conversations. I think that's great. Well, Gerard, it's been absolutely great hanging out with you today. Is there any final thoughts that you want to leave the community thinking about today?
Yeah, ecosystem. That's what it's all about. A whole ecosystem. You need to look at what energy is coming in and what energy is going out, and your responsibilities within that ecosystem. And if you can take responsibility for that, it's fascinating. if you follow a recipe, then you're not taking responsibility, because a recipe means I did it and it didn't work. It's not my fault. It's someone else's fault. If you take responsibility, if you look at the pattern and take responsibility for your decision, then when it works, you think, that's good. And if it doesn't work, you think, I know what I've got to do. I've got to do it this way next time. And that's good as well. So I think that's a big point.
Love that. The whole ecosystem. You've done a great way of articulating that here today. And I think it's a great last thought for everyone to think about, is the whole ecosystem, including you and future generations in that ecosystem as well. So thank you very much for sharing that.
No, it's been great.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for hanging out with us again. It's been an absolute pleasure. Check out eaglerisefarm.com.au. There's some amazing reading there. We've got some of it in our newsletter as well. So until next time, remember to get your hands dirty and start digging deeper into your soils.
Good point.